The small town of Dry Creek was used to strange sights, dust storms swallowing the plains, outlaws riding through with blood on their boots, even a preacher who went mad quoting scripture to cattle. But today, something different stirred them. Dusty air. An auction was being held on the edge of town. Not for land or livestock. No, this one had drawn a larger crowd for a darker curiosity. A woman. She stood shackled on a wooden platform, her bare feet bruised and her face hidden beneath a snarl of tangled, sun-bleached hair. Her clothes were ragged, more like stitched hides than fabric, and she smelled of smoke and pine needles. The marshal claimed she'd been found living half wild in the Bitterroot Mountains, feral, dangerous, untamable. The townsfolk called her the Mountain Witch or that she-wolf woman, depending on who you asked. Some said she killed a man with her teeth. Others whispered she summoned wolves. The only agreed truth was this: she wasn't normal. She wasn't tame. And now she was for sale. Elias Hart arrived just as the auctioneer banged his gavel and started the bidding. The tall, broad-shouldered rancher looked out of place in the crowd, not because of his clean boots or silent manner, but because he wasn't there to gawk. He stood at the edge, arms folded, hat tipped low, shadow hiding his pale blue eyes. It had been 2 winters since his wife Sarah died. 2 long winters full of silence and empty mornings. People said he never smiled after the funeral, never looked at another woman. His ranch had doubled in size, but his heart had shriveled to stone. And yet, something about the woman on the platform stirred something in him. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't pity. It was recognition, deep and strange. There was something in her posture, the way she stared at the crowd with loathing but no fear. It reminded him of Sarah, once cornered by a rattlesnake on their porch, how she never flinched, never screamed, just slowly reached for the shovel. The bidding was low at first. A trapper offered $10. A saloon owner, grinning, went to $25. But when he said he'd put her behind glass like a wild cat, Elias stepped forward. $50, he said flatly. The crowd hushed. Heads turned. The saloon man tried laughing it off, but Elias wasn't bluffing. His voice had the weight of a hammer. The auctioneer blinked. $50 going once. No one dared go higher. Sold to Mr. Hart. The shackles were handed over. The woman didn't fight. She didn't speak. Just looked at Elias with those sharp golden brown eyes, like she was reading him from the inside out. He didn't say a word to her. He simply untied her wrists, handed her a wool blanket, and led her to his wagon. The ride to the Hart Ranch was long and silent. Elias didn't try to talk. He didn't ask questions. He offered her food. She didn't touch it. Water she drank like a deer, fast and wary. When they reached the ranch, he stopped. By the barn, hopped down, and gestured to the main house. "You don't owe me anything," he said simply. "But if you want shelter, it's there." She didn't respond. Just stepped off the wagon, barefoot, and looked around like a wild thing checking for snares. The ranch hands watched from a distance. Murmurs passed between them. Why'd he bring her here? What is she? That night, Elias set a plate on the porch, lit the lantern, and sat by the fire inside, staring at the empty chair across from him. It used to be Sarah's chair. Used to be. Filled with laughter and teasing and the smell of cinnamon tea. Now, it sat as empty as the space in his chest. Outside, the wild woman crouched by the steps, watching the light flicker in the window. She didn't eat the food, but she didn't run either. She just waited like she was measuring the place. Or maybe waiting for it to measure her. And inside, Elias sat with ghosts, not knowing that the woman he'd brought home carried one of those ghosts in her heart too, not knowing that one day soon she would whisper something that would make him question everything he thought he buried with his wife. The first morning dawned gray and quiet over the Hart Ranch. The cattle were already stirring in the lower pasture, but Elias wasn't in the barn like usual. He stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the strange woman he'd brought home crouch by the edge of the corral, like she belonged to neither man nor land. She hadn't stepped foot inside the house. Instead, she had slept curled beneath the porch with nothing but the wool blanket he'd given her and the earth as her bed. Her eyes had opened before sunrise like some internal mountain clock told her when the world stirred. Elias didn't speak. He just left a small loaf of bread and smoked meat on a wooden plate beside her and walked away. She didn't eat while he watched Dot. By midday, word had spread to every corner of the ranch that the mountain woman was still silent, still feral, and still dangerous. The ranch hands gave her wide berth. One of them, a wiry kid named Jesse, tried tossing her a biscuit like she was some half-tamed dog. She didn't even flinch. Just stared until he looked away, red-faced. "She's got eyes like a cougar," one of the older hands muttered. "Ain't." "Right. You see how she don't blink?" "She's not a beast," Elias said quietly from behind them, making them both jump. "She's a woman, and this is her home now. Treat her like it." They nodded quickly and dispersed, but the fear lingered. By evening, Elias found her behind the barn, sitting cross-legged in the dust, watching the chickens peck. One of the hens had hopped close to her, surprisingly close, and she held out a hand, palm up, patient and still. The hen pecked once, then scurried away. He didn't interrupt, just watched from a distance. Every movement she made was cautious, quiet, learned in solitude. She didn't move like someone raised by people. She moved like she expected the ground to betray her. Elias tried again that night. He left the back door open, the fire burning low, and 2 plates set on the table just like old times. Sarah had always insisted on 2 plates, even when they fought. He hoped, God, he didn't know why, but he hoped this woman would come in, take a seat, say something. Anything. She didn't. She sat on the porch in the dark, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shield. She made no sound, didn't even rock or hum like most wild creatures might. She was just still. And Elias, for all his ruggedness, didn't know what to do with that kind of silence. On the 3rd day, she entered the barn uninvited. He found her crouched beside a Mari in labor, her hands surprisingly gentle as she rubbed the animal's flank, whispering something in a language he didn't recognize. She didn't seem afraid of the blood or the kicking. In fact, the Mari calmed more under her hands than she ever did under Elias's. "She always gets skittish," he murmured. The woman didn't look up. She just pressed her forehead to the Mari's neck, and for a moment Elias could swear he saw something ancient pass between them like a whisper passed from beast to human. The foal was born before midnight. Healthy, strong. The ranch hands watched through the cracks in the stall, none daring to step in. When it was over, Elias offered her a clean towel. She took it without a word. Still, not one syllable had passed her lips. That night Elias found her standing outside the house, staring at the stars. He joined her, not too close. "Just enough. You ever going to tell me your name?" he asked softly. She turned to him. Her eyes weren't wild anymore. They were tired, weathered, like someone who'd carried 1,000 winters in her bones. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then finally, a voice hoarse, unsure, scraped out one word. "No." And she turned and walked away. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something Elias couldn't name. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the silence of someone who couldn't speak. It was the silence of someone who chose not to. Not yet. That night, the fire crackled low in Elias' Hart's parlor. The warmth should have been comforting, but it only reminded him of who wasn't there to share it. He sat alone, boots off, whiskey untouched beside him. The woman still nameless was Out near the barn again, her silhouette faint beneath the full moon. She never strayed far. But she never came close either. Inside, the shadows of memory stretched longer than the flames. He could still picture Sarah curled in the chair across from him, legs tucked beneath her, reading aloud from some ridiculous dime novel. She had a voice that danced when she laughed and struck like a whip when she was angry. But her favorite tone had been soft like wind in tall grass. She used to hum while cooking, talk to the horses like they were children. And every night, as Elias came in from working the fields, she'd tease, "You always leave the gate open when you're thinking too hard." It was such a small thing. A habit. He never remembered doing it. But she'd always noticed. He smiled. Faintly, then the smile faded. She'd been gone 2 years, and that sentence still echoed in his mind. Outside, Wren, the woman he'd bought but hadn't claimed, sat cross-legged near the pasture fence, staring up at the stars she'd made. No trouble since she arrived, no attempt to flee. She slept outside, ate sparingly, moved like smoke, and said nothing more. Yet Elias couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she let on. There was something familiar in her, something he didn't want to admit. He stepped onto the porch quietly, carrying a second blanket. "You'll freeze tonight," he said. Laying it on the railing near her, she didn't look at him, but her fingers reached for the fabric. Slow, deliberate. "Storm coming," he added, more to himself than her. She nodded, not a word, but a response. That was progress. He returned to the fire and poured the whiskey. The burn in his throat reminded him he was still alive. Later that night, a strange sound drifted through the open window, soft, broken, but unmistakable. A voice. Elias froze. He moved quietly to the window and leaned out. The woman was sleeping. Near the porch again, but her body twitched in restless dreams. She muttered in her sleep, barely audible. But the sound cut through the night air like a blade. Elias, his heart stopped. She'd said his name. He didn't breathe. Didn't move. Just stared at her, lying curled with both blankets tight around her. The tone wasn't fear. It was sorrow, grief. The same way Sarah had said it that last morning before the fever took her completely. "Don't leave the gate open." The blood drained from his face. He stumbled back from the window, gripped the table for balance. The chair creaked beneath him as he sat down hard, heart pounding. He could have misheard, could have imagined it. But he knew those words. They weren't common. They were Sarah's. The next morning, the woman was up before dawn as usual. Elias watched her from the kitchen window as she walked the fence line barefoot, eyes scanning the horizon like she expected something or someone to come out of the trees. He stepped outside. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "The gate thing, that saying." "Where'd you hear it?" A long silence. Then, finally, she looked at him, her expression unreadable. "From a woman," she said. Her voice was hoarse but steady now. "Long time ago." Elias's throat tightened. "What woman?" "She never told me her name," the woman replied, "but she had kind eyes. She gave me food, taught me to boil water, not drink from the creek, hummed songs, looked like you." That last line hit like a hammer. "Where?" "In the mountains, before the blizzard. She helped me, then she disappeared." Elias felt the wind leave his chest. Sarah had gone missing during a blizzard. Everyone assumed she died trying to reach town for help. But what if? That night, Elias stared into the fire again, but the past didn't feel so far away anymore. The woman he'd brought home wasn't just wild. She was carrying something Sarah had left behind, and maybe he hadn't lost everything. After all, the storm rolled in around midnight. Wind howled across the plains, rattling the barn doors and flinging dust against the windows like tiny fists. Elias barely slept. Something in his chest felt tangled tighter than the night before. He had always loved storms. Sarah used to curl beside him as thunder rumbled through the valley, whispering stories or singing low lullabies. But now, every crack of lightning just made the emptiness louder. He rose before dawn, threw on his coat, and went to check the livestock. The ranch hands were already awake, their lanterns bobbing in the gloom as they hurried to the pens. Rain had flooded the far pasture, and the small riverbed running near the property had swollen over. One of the calves, newborn, barely a week old, had gotten separated in the chaos. "She's downstream," Jesse shouted, pointing toward the flooded wash. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed a rope and started running toward the bend, heart pounding harder than his boots on the wet ground. That's when he saw her. The woman ran. She was already in the water. She had seen the calf before. Any of them. While the men shouted and scrambled, she had slipped through the fence and waded into the muddy, churning water like it was her element. Her steps were steady, careful. The rain soaked her dress to her knees. Her wild hair clung to her cheeks, and her arms strained as she reached for the bleeding calf caught between two rocks. Elias stood frozen for a moment. The water could have swept her away. That river had taken stronger men, but she didn't look afraid. She cradled the calf's head and whispered something, a sound Elias couldn't hear but recognized all the same. Comfort. The same tone Sarah used when a colt was born too early. With a sudden surge of strength, Wren pulled the calf loose and waded back to shore, water dragging at her legs, muscles trembling. Elias ran forward, grabbing the rope from his shoulder and tossing it out. She took it without hesitation. Together, they pulled the calf to safety, dragging it through the mud and grass until it flopped onto the bank. Breathing hard, Wren collapsed. Beside it, chest heaving, face muddy and bruised, Elias knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "The calf?" "Alive, thanks to you." She looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, something changed in her eyes. Not fear. Not weariness. Trust. Back at the ranch, Elias lit the fire and left her a fresh towel and one of Sarah's old flannel shirts. He didn't say a word, just placed them on the bench by the hearth. When he returned 10 minutes later with a kettle of hot water, she was inside, for the first time, wrapped in the shirt, damp hair combed back with her fingers, bare feet curled. Beneath her, she looked out of place in the house like a ghost who didn't know where to settle. Elias handed her a cup of tea. She took it with both hands and sniffed it first, cautious. Then drank. They sat in silence, listening to the storm fade. "You didn't have to go in after that calf," he said eventually. "You would have," she replied. He nodded. Then, after a pause, she asked quietly, "Why did you buy me?" Elias wasn't sure how to answer. "I didn't mean to," he said honestly. "I saw something in your eyes. Thought maybe you didn't belong there. Same as me." She studied him for a long time. "You don't belong either?" "Not since Sarah died." She looked down into her cup. "That was her name," he added. "My wife, the one you spoke about." "I didn't know who she was," Wren said, "but I never forgot her." Elias nodded, eyes misting. "Me neither." That night, she slept near the fire, not outside. The ranch hands were silent the next day, unsure of what to make of it all. The wild woman had rescued one of their own. She hadn't spoken to any of them, but she'd stepped into the storm and come out with something alive. And Elias? He caught himself watching her differently now, not as a burden, not even as a mystery, but as someone placed in his path, for a reason he didn't yet understand. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled like wet soil and wood smoke. The mountains loomed in the distance, dusted with fresh snow along the ridges. Spring was near, but the chill hadn't left. Elias Hart walked the fence line that morning, checking for storm damage. He carried a hammer and a spool of wire, lost in thought, his boots crunching through damp earth. He paused at the north gate one he always forgot to latch. Sure enough, it hung wide open. He cursed under his breath and knelt to fix it. That's when he heard her voice. Clear this time. You always leave the gate open when you're thinking. Too hard. The hammer slipped from his hand. He stood slowly, spine stiffening, blood draining from his face. She was behind him. Ren. She stood barefoot in the grass, wearing the flannel shirt again. Arms loose at her sides, hair damp from washing. Her eyes weren't wild this morning. They were steady. Knowing. Elias turned fully toward her. What did you say? He asked, voice low, her lips pressed together, not nervous but cautious, like she knew what those words meant to him. Heard it once, she said, a long time ago. Where? He demanded, more harshly than he meant. In a cave near Bitterroot Pass, she answered. There was a woman. She took me in when I was hurt, fed me, covered me in her own coat. She talked about you. Elias's throat tightened. She called you hard-headed, Ren said with the faintest hint of a smile. Said she married a man with a soft heart and stubborn bones. He stepped back, breath catching. Those exact words Sarah had whispered. Them to him once, lying beside him under a blanket of stars. You knew her, he said. I think. She saved me, Ren replied. I was sick, feverish. She brought me roots to chew, told me stories, hummed songs while she boiled water. I didn't know her name, but she wore a silver ring with a chipped turquoise stone. Elias's knees nearly buckled. He staggered to a nearby fence post and gripped it like an anchor. That ring, he whispered, it was mine. I gave it to Sarah before we were even married. Ren was quiet. She died in that blizzard, he said, voice trembling. The search party never found her. We thought she froze, trying to reach town. She never made it to town, Ren said softly. She stayed, with me, until her firewood ran out. Tears welled in Elias's eyes. He turned away from her, his shoulders stiff, fighting the sob building in his throat. She saved someone, he said after a long pause. She didn't die alone. No, Ren answered. She died like she lived protecting someone who didn't deserve. Her, Elias laughed bitterly. She always did that. Even when I pushed her away. Even when I was too blind to see what I had. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Ren stepped closer, not too close. Just enough. She told me about this place, she said. The way the sunrise hits the porch. How the horses come running when you whistle. She wanted to come. Back. Elias swallowed hard. And you remembered all of it? Every word. He looked at her again, really looked. The feral woman from the auction was gone. In her place stood someone weathered, strong, marked by kindness and loss alike. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked. Because I didn't know who you were. Until I saw the ring on your windowsill, she said. And because I didn't trust you. And now? She met his eyes. Now I think she sent me here for a reason. That night, Elias sat alone by the fire again. But something had changed. The silence wasn't so empty anymore. Outside, Ren walked the pasture fence again, only this time. She closed the gate behind her. Elias smiled faintly as he watched through the window. For the first time in 2 years, the ranch didn't feel haunted. It felt like home. For the next few days, Elias couldn't get the words out of his head. You always leave the gate open when you're thinking too hard. The exact phrase. The voice not Sarah's but carrying. The same tone, the same care, the same memory. He went about his ranch chores like a man walking through fog. Feeding cattle, mending rails, giving orders, but his mind was far away, spiraling into the mountains and back into time. That night, he found himself outside, pacing near the porch. Wren sat nearby, stringing wildflowers into some sort of braid, her fingers quick and sure. She didn't look up. Elias stopped cold and faced her. He couldn't carry it anymore. I need to know, he said. Everything. Her hands paused. About Sarah, he added, voice low. You didn't just meet her. You knew her. Wren looked up at him. Her expression wasn't defensive, but it wasn't apologetic either. Yes, she said simply. Tell me. Wren set the flowers down and slowly stood. She looked to the mountains like she was measuring how far they still pulled at her. Then she motioned toward the trail behind the barn. Walk with me, she said. Elias hesitated, then followed. They climbed a narrow path into the hills, the pine trees thick with shadows and the moonlight filtering through like a ghost's breath. She moved like she belonged in the woods, barefoot, silent. Elias kept pace, boots crunching dry twigs, breath caught somewhere between grief and hope. Finally, they reached a high ridge that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. The wind was cold but clean. Wren sat on a flat stone, hugging her knees. Elias stood nearby, waiting. She found me after a bad winter, Wren began. I was maybe 16, maybe older. I'd been living on pine bark and squirrel bones. The fever had taken half my memory. I was more animal than girl. Elias listened in silence, fists clenched. I collapsed near a cave. Next thing I knew, there was a fire burning, and she was sitting beside me, feeding me broth, humming something soft. She never asked my name, never told me hers, but she stayed with me for 5 days. Elias's voice cracked. Why didn't she try to come home? She couldn't, Wren said, her eyes haunted. The storm came. Snow too deep to walk. She said, if I can't get back, at least I'll do something good before I go. His breath hitched. That sounds like her. She left me everything, Wren whispered. Her ring, her knife, her story, and her words, every one of them. I carved them into memory like stone, afraid they'd fade. Elias swallowed the lump in his throat. You said she died helping you. She did, Wren said softly. On the 6th night, she didn't wake up. I think her body gave out. She'd spent all her strength on me. Tears spilled from Elias's eyes, but he didn't hide them. He let the wind carry them into the dark. I buried her, Wren said, with her coat wrapped around her. I didn't know where this ranch was until someone mentioned your name at the auction. That's why I didn't run. Elias stared at her. This woman, the wild creature he brought home from a place of shame and chains, was the last soul to touch. His wife. The final page in a story he thought he'd never get to finish. You should have told me sooner, he murmured. I didn't know how you'd take it, she said. People don't always want the truth when it comes wrapped in pain. He nodded. I'm not most people. No, she said, meeting his eyes. You're the one she loved. The walk back was silent, but it wasn't heavy anymore. Wren walked beside him, now not behind, and Elias felt, for the first time, that the ghost of Sarah wasn't something to be mourned, but something to carry forward. The next morning, Elias saddled his horse early, a quiet heaviness resting on his shoulders. He found Wren already awake, crouched near the chicken coop, feeding the hens in silence. I'm riding up into the pass, he said. Wren looked up. Why? Show me, he said gently, where you buried her. Wren didn't hesitate. She nodded once, wiped her hands on her dress, and fetched a worn satchel from under the porch. Inside it were flint, a bone-handled knife, and a strip of leather, carefully preserved items, weathered by time. Been carrying them since I left, she said. Didn't know why, until now. The ride up Bitterroot Pass was steep, and slow. They rode in silence for most of the morning, following game trails and rock-split streams. Wren led the way. She didn't ride like a proper lady. Her posture was rough, wild, but she rode with certainty. Like the mountains themselves whispered the direction into her bones. As the sun reached its peak, they reached a narrow ledge between two cliffs. Snow still clung to the shady spots and pine needles carpeted the trail. "This is it," she said. Elias dismounted and followed her through a break in the trees. There, half hidden beneath moss and stones, was a modest grave, marked by a ring of stacked rocks. A carved piece of driftwood, worn from weather, sat at its head. Wren knelt beside it, brushing away leaves and pine cones. "I came back every spring," she whispered. "Brought food, flowers, talked to her, told her stories about what I saw, about people I met, about you when I found out your name." Elias crouched beside her, heart hammering in his chest. The grave was simple, but sacred. "She died here," he said softly, "and I buried an empty box back home." Wren nodded. "I'm sorry you didn't know," she whispered. He stared at the stones. "You were just a girl." "I was something," she murmured. "Not quite a girl, not yet a woman. Just a shadow trying to survive." Elias's voice cracked. "And she gave you light." Wren glanced at him, her eyes wet. "She was the first person who saw me as human. Everyone else looked at me like a stray dog, but not her." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, his wedding ring. He'd taken it off a year after Sarah's death, thinking it was time. But he'd never thrown it away. Now he placed it gently atop the grave. "She'd want you to have it," he said. Wren shook her head. "It's not mine. It's not for wearing," he replied. "It's for remembering, for honoring her." Wren pressed her hand over it, and for a moment they both sat in silence, two strangers forever connected by a woman whose kindness bridged life and death. On the ride down, Wren finally spoke about the years she never mentioned. After Sarah died, she said, she lived off the land for another winter, angry, confused, barely holding herself together. She avoided people, stayed in caves, and trusted no one. Then came the trapper's man who found her sleeping and thought she was theirs to take. She fought hard, left one of them bloodied. The others chased her into a canyon. That's how the marshal eventually found her, wounded, starving, and half mad. "They dragged me down to sell like cattle," she said. "I figured it was the end, but it wasn't," Elias said quietly. "No," she agreed. "You showed up." They rode in silence for a moment longer. Then Elias asked, "Do you believe in fate?" Wren gave a faint, tired smile. "Not until now." That night, back at the ranch, Elias lit a single candle for Sarah and set it on the porch railing. Wren watched from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, eyes glinting in the soft light. "Thank you," he said, turning toward her, "for carrying her with you, for not forgetting." "She wouldn't let me," Wren replied. "She lived in my head all these years, like a fire that wouldn't die." Elias nodded. "She was that kind of woman." "And you," Wren said softly, "were the reason she stayed alive long enough to help me." He looked at her, something stirring in his chest. Maybe love wasn't something you found again. Maybe it was something someone handed you to carry forward. The days that followed were filled with quiet work. Calves were being born, fences needed mending, and the river had begun to swell with spring melt. Wren no longer lingered on the edges. She helped in the barn, milked the goats, even patched a torn saddlebag with perfect, precise stitches. The ranch hands stopped avoiding her. They didn't talk much, but they nodded in her direction now. Some even asked her for help. Elias watched it all unfold like someone waking from a long, cold dream. She belonged not because she tried to, but because Sarah had planted a piece of herself in this woman. And now that piece was taking root. Still, something unsettled him. The trip to the grave had stirred more than memories. It had cracked something wide open. Grief, yes. but something else too. A question. If Sarah had lived just a few days longer to save someone else, then why hadn't she made it home? Why hadn't she tried? One evening, Elias was sorting tack in the barn when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Wren stood there, holding an old bundle of cloth. "I thought you should have this," she said. He took it and carefully unfolded the cloth. Inside was a tattered journal, wrapped in oilskin, the pages warped from weather and time. He opened. It didn't recognize Sarah's handwriting instantly. "She left it in the cave," Wren said. "I never read it. Didn't feel right." Elias sat on a hay bale and turned the first page. "If this book is ever found and I'm gone, I hope you." "No, I didn't run. I stayed, because I couldn't walk away from her." His hands trembled. The entries were short but full of love and clarity. Sarah had written about Wren, her fear, her injuries, her fierce will to survive. She wrote about Elias too, how she missed him, how she prayed he was warm and fed, and not blaming himself for her absence. And then came the final pages. "I can't feel my toes anymore. The girl is asleep. I used the last of the kindling tonight, but I'm not afraid. I just wish I could say goodbye properly. Tell him I'd do it all again. I'd always choose kindness over survival, even now." Elias closed the book and pressed it to his chest. Wren stood quietly nearby, as if giving him space to break. "I thought I was angry at her," he whispered. "For not coming home, for leaving me alone." Wren knelt beside him. "She did come home, through me." He looked at her, really looked. The woman before him wasn't wild anymore. Her hair was still tangled, and her hands still bore the scars of hard living, but her eyes were soft now, present. "I didn't just bury Sarah," Elias said. "I buried the best parts of myself with her, but you brought them back." Wren didn't smile, but her voice was warm. "She asked me to find you, not with words, but with that ring, that journal, and everything she gave me. She wanted me to carry her back to you." He nodded. "And now I've got her words, her heart, her legacy." Wren placed her hand lightly over his. "And now," she said, "you can grieve the truth, not just the hole she left." That night, Elias built a fire out back taller than usual, flames licking high into the night. He placed Sarah's journal on a small wooden stand. Surrounded by wildflowers Wren had gathered, one by one, the ranch hands joined him. They didn't ask questions. They just stood in quiet respect. Wren sat beside Elias, silent, but close enough that their shoulders touched. As the fire burned bright, Elias read aloud Sarah's final words, the ones about kindness, about sacrifice, about never regretting doing what was right. When he finished, he looked at Wren. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Thank the woman who loved you enough to leave pieces of herself behind in someone like me." The fire burned long into the night, and Elias didn't feel hollow anymore. The grief was still there, but now it had shape and meaning. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel lost. He felt found. Thunder rolled across the valley late that evening, shaking the windows and rattling the dishes on the shelves. Wren stood at the window in Elias's cabin, watching as the clouds split open and the wind bent the trees sideways. She wasn't afraid of storms, but something about this one felt different, like it was trying to pull something loose from inside her. Behind her, Elias was closing shutters, laying down towels to catch leaks. Rain had already started to hammer the roof, storms turning. "Nasty," he said. "Better stay inside tonight." Wren nodded, still staring at the lightning crawling across the sky. Then she whispered, "I remember this kind of sky. The night before they came for my mother." Elias paused. "The men who took her?" Wren turned from the window. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes burned. She was sold. "I never told Sarah that part," she said. "I didn't tell anyone." "But—" "I heard it all. I was under the floorboards," she screamed. They laughed. Then they paid. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the thunder and the sound of their breath. "I wasn't wild because I was born that way," she said bitterly. "I was made wild by men who thought they could buy anything, even souls." Elias stepped forward, heart aching at the pain he saw etched across her face. "I don't see Wild anymore," he said. "I see someone who survived more than anyone should." Wren shook her head. "You see her in me, Sarah. That's why you look at me like that. It's not me you're holding on to, it's a ghost." His face fell slightly. "Maybe I did, at first, but not now." She stepped back, her voice rising. "You don't know what you're doing. I'm not some sweet prairie widow with a clean past. I've killed things, Elias. I've wanted to. That doesn't go away just because someone kind died near me. You think I don't carry blood on my hands?" He snapped back. "I fought in the war. I've buried men who cried for their mamas. I've watched good boys bleed out over cattle. You think kindness lives in people who've never known hate? No, it lives in the ones who fight it every damn day." Lightning struck close enough to rattle the window pane. Wren flinched, her hands trembling. Elias stepped toward her, gentler now. "I don't need you to be clean," he said softly. "I just need you to be here." Her lip quivered. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I stopped breathing the day Sarah died. But when you spoke her words, you didn't bring her back, you brought me back." Wren tried to turn away, but he caught her hand. "You're not a ghost," he said. "You're flesh and blood and fire. And I've never wanted anything more than I want you to stay." The wind howled, and the storm raged outside, but inside that cabin, something long frozen finally melted. Wren leaned forward, her forehead resting against his chest, and let herself cry not the tight, silent tears of survival, but the raw, gasping sobs of someone who'd finally been seen. Elias held her, not like a man comforting a wounded thing, but like a man steadying something powerful, something sacred. She clutched his shirt, trembling. "I wanted to hate you," she said, "for buying me, for reminding me of everything I lost." "But you didn't," he murmured. "No," she whispered. "You looked at me like I was worth keeping, even when I didn't believe it myself." They sat on the floor as the storm passed, Wren's head on his shoulder, Elias's fingers laced with hers. There were no promises, no declarations, just a shared understanding that something had shifted permanently. Not love. Not yet. But the possibility of it. And for two people who'd buried their pasts in different kinds of silence, that possibility felt like sunlight breaking through. After the longest night. By dawn, the storm had passed. But inside them both, something was just beginning. Spring settled into the valley like a second chance. The earth softened under the sun. The apple trees behind the barn were blossoms like promises. Calves kicked beside their mothers in the tall grass. And the ranch, once quiet with grief, began to feel like a place meant for living again. Wren stood at the edge of the field, a basket slung over her hip, gathering wild greens. Her boots were dusty, her sleeves rolled up, her hair still wild but brushed, loosely tied with a strip of soft fabric from Sarah's old apron. Elias watched her from the porch. Not the way a man watches something fragile, but the way a man watches something he never thought he'd be lucky enough to keep. He hadn't asked her to stay, not after the storm, not after the fire, not even after she'd stood beside him at Sarah's grave again last week and whispered she would have loved these flowers. But she had stayed anyway. She slept in the main house now, cooked beside him, rode fence with the ranch hands, knew each horse by name, but she hadn't said the words. Neither had he. Until one evening, when the wind was warm and the first stars had blinked open above the barn roof. Wren sat beside Elias on the porch bench, quiet, tired, content. She held a cup of warm milk. He nursed a tin mug of coffee. You fixed that fence by the creek? She asked softly. Bent post near the willow. Got it back up. She nodded. He looked at her hands. You still think about leaving? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the mug down and leaned forward, elbows on knees, gaze fixed on the sky. I used to think I didn't belong anywhere. Every time someone offered a place to stay, it came with a price. She turned to him. You never asked anything of me, Elias, not even thanks. You gave enough, he said, without even meaning to. She smiled small, but real. Then she reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out the ring, Sarah's wedding band. She held it out in her palm, open between them. I think it's time you stopped carrying ghosts, she said. This belongs to the past. He looked down at the ring, then up at her. No, he said. It belongs to you. Her eyes flickered. Me, she chose you. Maybe not with words, but with everything else. She gave you the last of her. Kindness, her strength, her legacy. That ring's not about marriage anymore. It's about survival. It's about love, the way Sarah understood it. He took her hand, closed her fingers gently around the ring. Keep it, he whispered, not because you're hers. Not because you're mine, but because you earned it. Wren swallowed hard. Then she leaned into him slowly, deliberately, and rested her head against his shoulder. I'm not leaving, she said. I know. They sat like that for a long time, as crickets sang and moonlight spilled over the porch rail. Weeks passed. Then months. People started whispering again, only this time, not in fear. She's the one who came down from the mountains and fixed that widower's broken heart. I heard she nursed his wife's soul like it was her own. Wild thing turned gentle only for him. Wren didn't care. Let them talk. She had work to do, a life to build. And for the first time, she wanted it. One crisp morning, a rider came up the road. A young girl with dirt on her face and a baby swaddled across her back. Barefoot, eyes wide with fear. She stopped in the yard, looking ready to bolt. Elias stepped out, but it was Wren who walked to her. Kneeling, she offered her hand. You hungry? She asked softly. The girl nodded. Wren smiled. Good. I make a fine skillet bread, and this man behind me never finishes his plate. Elias chuckled. The girl followed them inside, and just like that, Wren saw the circle closing. Another soul. On the run. Another chance to offer the grace she'd once been given. In the corner of the cabin, beside the hearth, Sarah's ring now hung on a chain from the mantel. Not worn, but honored. A reminder that love leaves echoes, and sometimes those echoes find a way to bloom again in the most unexpected hearts. Wren didn't belong to the mountains anymore. She belonged here. With him. And she didn't need to whisper Sarah's words anymore, because now she had her own.